Hello, everyone. Thanks for listening to Vita May podcast. I'm happy to recommend using Anchor.fm as my podcast tool. It's a free tool. It automatically publishes your podcast to Spotify. You may manually submit your podcast to Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, Castbox.fm, and others. It is straightforward to use from your mobile phone application or computer and laptop browser. You can invite friends and record when ready and more. You may also monetize by recording guided ads that you select per episode. Join in on the fun of sharing your experiences and stories and download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Again, that's anchor.fm. Thank you. Welcome to Vita May. Our topic today is to discuss self-publishing your book. I'm very thankful to have Chyina Powell join me on the podcast as a guest speaker. Welcome, Chyina.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. We met through our Lean In Women of Color writing circle, and we pretty much feels like we've been together for a while, but it's only been since last September as we checked. Throughout the years, I think both of us, even since younger, we've been experimenting with writing in general, and thankfully, Chyina is an editor. I'm still trying to establish myself as a writer. I definitely review other people's manuscripts. So we're trying to get a better understanding and sharing the knowledge on how to do publishing of self-published books. The latter are some of the reasons why I've been publishing and broadcasting podcasts is I get to invite cool people like Chyina on the podcast. So let's get started. Can you give us some background of yourself?
So I've always loved books. I'm kind of the nerd in my family. I've always loved, reading. And it's funny to me now, but I've always wanted to do something with words. When I was a kid, like people would, how people ask you what you want to do when you grow up, and they say firefighter or astronaut. And I always said professional book reader.
That's awesome.
And my dad would write me letters and I would correct them and I would give them back to him, and like little notes and stuff, and I would correct them and give them back to him.
That's fun though.
I've always loved making up stories and writing them down on like scraps of paper. So as I got older and realized that, there was kind of a job where I could be a professional book reader as an editor, I knew that's what I wanted to do.
And that's what we need, right? That's awesome. I'm glad you were able to actually think about it growing up, as young as you were, and now you're basically doing the dream job that you want, right?
Yeah, it's really cool. A lot of people don't, a lot of people have different dreams, from when you're 4 years old to, now I'm 25. Like that's, normally people are like, you know what, maybe I don't want to be an astronaut. Maybe I want to be a doctor or, but I've always wanted to do what I'm doing now, which I think is it's a wonderful thing.
That's awesome. Yeah, and definitely grateful to be able to have you share that, because that gives us definitely how you started, your background on it, right? And it's really neat to have, childhood dreams come true for sure, especially as we grow older. And I know you do amazing work. And speaking of work, what types of written work do you create typically?
So, a lot of people will tell you, oh, well, I write fiction or I write poetry, but I have never been a genre writer. So that means I dabble in all genres. I write poetry, short stories, novellas, novels. I write dramas. I've even won an award for one of my plays. I also write articles and essays as a freelance writer. So I do a little bit of everything.
That's amazing. That's definitely quite a skill and gift to be able to adjust to all those different types of writing. So that's very cool. What is essential in understanding copyrights, ISBN, and barcodes when it comes to publishing your book? I know we talked about that during one of our meetings. Do you want to share some insights on why that's so important and critical to know and understand?
Oh, of course. So a lot of people are looking towards self-publishing now instead of traditional publishing. And that's a cool thing. Self-publishing is a fun process, and it kind of shows you step by step how publishing happens. But a lot of times, those who are new to self-publishing don't really get the full, picture. And that's because a lot of the companies use a lot of jargon, so it's kind of confusing. And so when you go into self-publishing, one thing you have to know is that you have to know your rights. So a copyright is kind of like putting your stamp on it. It's making sure that no one else is allowed to use your work. And that's essential, because if you don't have a copyright on the work, someone can just slap a different title on it and say it's theirs. And basically they might end up getting credit for the, what could have been years of your hard, work and dedication. Additionally, ISBNs are the number on the back of a book. A lot of people don't really realize, what that number is for, but an ISBN is how people identify your book. It's an international code. So it's how bookstores order your books. It's how we can look, those in the publishing industry can look up your book. It's how reviewers review your book through professional review sites and things of that nature. So you have to have an ISBN. And whilst a lot of traditional, most traditional publishers will provide it for you, not all self-publishers do. Which is another, thing. You want to make sure you have an ISBN for your book, because if you don't, you're never going to get your book out there. Unless, if you're cool with no one ever reading your book and just saying, I wrote a book, then you don't have to get an ISBN. But if you want someone out there in the great big world to read your book, you're going to need an ISBN. And another thing to note is that barcodes and ISBNs are not the same thing. Just because you buy an ISBN through a publisher or on your own does not mean you have a barcode. So one thing I like to tell people when they're self-publishing is to be extremely careful with the publisher you're choosing, and to make sure that you know all of the services they provide before you go and decide to go with a self-publishing entity. Because if you don't understand copyrights and ISBNs and all of this kind of publishing jargon, you're putting your work in danger, because not all self-publishing entities and independent publishers, have the same resources available as traditional publishers. So they may expect you to buy an ISBN, or they may charge you a large fee, to get a barcode, things like that. And so you really have to be careful and do your homework on these companies, because you may end up handing over more rights than you ever intended, or paying a lot more upfront than you initially thought. Because if let's say you go with a small publisher and they provide your ISBN, sometimes when you go with like a self-publishing entity, that means you will not be able to sell that book on any other platform except theirs. Mm-hmm. And that's huge. Like, let's say, I know you're working on a piece right now, Mabel, and let's say you publish your book through this, or you're just going to call it ABC Publishing, but you decide, this is an ebook only, but I want a physical book. Maybe I can sell it in bookstores. Mm-hmm. You read the fine print of your contract and say, oh no, you can't publish this in bookstores unless you call it something different, buy a new ISBN, and go through this process all over again for the same book. Mm-hmm. Just think of the hassle that would cause you, and all the extra time you would have to commit to something that it's yours, you own it, and yet in a way you don't.
Right.
I think that when people are going through self-publishing, the self-publishing process, they really need to understand these concepts in order to navigate the process easier.
So as far as ISBN, like you mentioned, so understanding the difference of purchasing it yourself, right? The ISBN and the barcode, so that you're not necessarily tied into a specific entity or publisher gives you a little bit more flexibility to publish it or sell it somewhere else. So the writer needs to really understand the difference between attaching yourself to a specific entity, right? Okay. And I know we talked about it in our circle before that the barcode, including myself, we always thought it was the same as the ISBN number, but that's not necessarily true. You said it was other things, and I'm trying to recall what it was. It's not exactly the same number that you see in the barcode. It could be more metadata or additional information that's represented in a barcode.
Correct.
Right? Okay. So yeah,
they're not the same thing.
Yeah, they're not the same thing. Are there any other misconceptions that new authors need to think about, regarding ISBN and barcodes and copyrights?
There are so many, especially regarding like copyrights and ISBNs.
Okay.
When I was in high school, people said, "Oh, if you write it, then it's yours. You have the copyright." But that's not true. To ensure you have a copyright over your work, it needs to have been published, in the Library of Congress. And so when you go through a self-publishing entity, always make sure that they're going to put it in the Library of Congress for you. That should be like something you make sure to say, like when you're doing a contract or whatever, because just because it's out there, doesn't mean you own it yet. It's something to think about. But I actually, there is a writer that I follow, and she writes a lot of steampunk novels, and she wrote this amazing trilogy, but she didn't get the copyright for it. And I don't know if it was like her first trilogy or what have you. But then a few years later, I noticed that this other author I had to come along, and it sounded eerily similar to her books. And when I read them, they were the exact same books with a different name. And because she didn't have the copyright, he was, able to just use her work as his own with a different name. All the character names stayed the same. Pretty much everything was the same. Even the cover was pretty much the same.
Wow.
But because she did not have it copywritten, so she, go through with, a legal suit, which is horrible.
Yeah. I mean, wow. I can't believe that even people have that audacity to do that, but that is something that many new authors should definitely be aware of, the copyright specifically. You definitely don't want your material just taken off under you, and now you have to go through the legal consequences just to take it back as yours. So that's a large, investment, and definitely a painful process too. So I would say for anybody listening, just make sure that you are doing this diligence of checking this, like have a checklist. I know there's different ones that you could probably follow, but this is a big one right here. So thank you for noting that, Chyina. And then we're moving on to another question. While you were establishing yourself as an editor, what are some things that you wish you knew during your early years as editor and/or author?
I honestly and wholeheartedly wish I knew how important networking was. If I had even known that, like when I was in high school, I've always been kind of a homebody. I will sit at home, read a few books, and be fine. I don't have to see people for days. And as I started working in the industry, I realized how important it was to have connections. And if I would have known this just even a few years ago, I would have made sure to go out of my way to make more connections. Because in publishing, there's what we call the literati. And there are those old white men whose work you see in the front of bookstores and whose books you see on the news, and who have, commercials for their books, and who, all these things, these popular writers that you are familiar with, the writer Canning, and those who don't kind of fit into that mold, it's hard for them to get their foot in the door unless they know someone. In publishing, it's really about who you know. because you can sound amazing on paper. Like, let's say you're going in for a job interview to work in the publishing industry, or you're, submitting a query letter to an editor to hopefully get your book published by a traditional publisher that you want it to be published by for years and years and years. You can sound like the next Mother Teresa or the next Nelson Mandela on paper. But if you aren't friends with someone, if you don't, have a kind of a name to drop, it's going to be very hard for you to make headway in the publishing industry. Unless, like you are 100% amazing and one of that 1% part of that 1% who can do it without knowing somebody. In publishing, it's all about who you know. And another thing I really wish I would have known as I was coming up and working as an editor and working as an intern in all these different companies, I really wish I knew how important experience was. A lot of people joke, oh, well, they ask for 10 years experience before you're 18. And I had never realized that was the case until I decided I need to start, working in my field more. And so I probably would have started publishing earlier on. I published my first work when I was 12, I think. But I probably would have kept publishing because that was just a couple poems. I would have tried to get my name out there more. And I would have tried to work on journals, things of that nature. Because as an editor, a lot of, because I'm a freelance editor, so a lot of editing sites won't even let you sign up unless you have 10, 20 books under your belt. And so I wish I would have known how important experience was so I could have had an easier transition along the way.
So how long did it take you, once you realized that, how much effort, how much time did you have to, spend before you felt comfortable that you were recognized and capable and could be added as an editor in publishing?
Oh, wow. That is a loaded question. Sometimes I still don't think I am capable. And there's a book I worked on and it's a best-selling book, but it's just, it's kind of one of those things. I feel like even now I'm always learning. A lot of people don't realize this, but editorial manuals, they update every year with new things and new rules for different editorial styles. And when you work in different genres, as I do, you can't just know MLA style for creative works, but you might have to know Chicago style for essays or APA for business matters. So it's a constant process. I'm still growing and learning as an editor, because there's always new information.
Right. So you stay current through any type, mostly research and reading? Is there specific courses or classes you take or certifications? How do you stay up to date?
I have a lot of different sites I use. So Poets and Writers is a wonderful site. If you're interested in what's going on in the publishing industry and things of that nature. And there's also writers magazines such as the Writers Chronicle. For the more technical side, the editorial rules and things like that. Writer's Digest. I also have a copy of the MLA handbook, and there's this cool book. While I'm saying this, it's gonna sound weird because it's a style book, but to me it's a really cool book. But it's called the Copy Editor's Handbook, and I update that frequently as well. And it's kind of an abridged version of everything you need to know as a copy editor who works mainly with creative works, which is what I do. I mostly work with creative works. So it's really nice to have it and have it as a resource. And they have cool little, quizzes and things like that. So it keeps the knowledge in your brain. a lot of times in like this, like just in the world in general, since you're so used to having Google available, you sometimes forget certain things.
Right.
So it's nice to have it there so that if I ever happen to forget something, it's there for me to use.
So that's your main reference book, like a guide in general that you always have handy?
Of course, that is kind of like, it's kind of like the it's a book that all editors should read. It's like one of those mandatory books in high school that everyone had to read, like The Catcher in the Rye, but it's actually good. So I suggest that all editors read it at least once.
Okay. And so becoming an editor, does it require a certain amount of, like, after high school, college degree or anything as far as requirements to become an editor?
Yes. You need a degree, usually something to do with English or journalism or communication. Those are like the three big degrees. It has to have, you have to have some sort of education and schooling with proof that you've worked towards this. So in undergrad, I was an English major. That was my primary major. I had two majors. I was an English major and a business administration major. So there was a lot of writing involved, and I worked on different, journals and things like that. And then in graduate school, I was a creative writing major, and I got my master's in creative writing. But I made sure to take independent studies focused specifically on editing and working under editors and having internships with, publishing companies and editors that I had admired. So it's even if you don't have to get a master's degree to be an editor, but you need to have experience. You need to have a college degree, and you need to have proof that you have experience under your belt. So whether you've worked as an intern or an editorial assistant, there has to be something there to prove that you've put your time in before you can, make headway as an editor in the field.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely wanted to make sure we spoke of that, since you have that experience, and anybody that's interested, those are things that it would take, at least some of the things that you need to put into account when you're studying and becoming one, right? What are some common recommendations that you would give to new authors, at least from your perspective as an editor?
One, I think the biggest one actually would be to stop panicking. A lot of authors and writers tend to be like, this work has to be perfect before I send it in, and they get so frazzled. So just relax. Your work doesn't have to be perfect. That's what editors are for. We're here to help you make your work into everything you've ever hoped it, to be. Another suggestion would be to find some awesome beta readers. So beta readers are those people who you can be like, hey, let me run this by you. How do you like this? How does this sound? Does this make sense from chapter 1 to chapter 5? How does this character feel to you? Would it make sense if this character did this or that? And I know not everyone has a bookish family or friends who, have that sort of time. So one source that I use, especially when I'm writing, it's called Scribophile. And it's an online community of people who, you submit a chapter or whatever, and they will help you, build up your book. They will critique it. They will say, hey, this is working, but this is kind of weird. Maybe you want to clarify that. Things of that nature to help you get some of the editing done before you even send it out to an editor, and to help you work through your writing. Because if you announce something in chapter 1 and it seems like it's going to be extremely important, but you forget to include it, and now you're in the last chapter of your book, what's going to happen with that? They kind of help you to get through that. Hey, you forgot to look at this, and before you send it off to an editor, maybe you want to look at this. So I suggest finding awesome beta readers.
And those are typically paid service or free services for online?
Scribophile is a free service. It's super cool. They do offer a paid service, but it's completely free if you want to do that. The paid subscription is just if you want to be able to post more. So I believe that under the free subscription, you can only have a certain amount of works like to be critiqued at a time. But if you are using the paid, you can have as many as you like, which is nice. Also, you can have your works critiqued by more people, which is very nice.
Awesome. Yeah, because I know not everybody really likes to critique often or critique well. So what do you consider good types of feedbacks if they're editing or assisting you in the beta reading?
So good feedback is constructive. So as I kind of said or alluded to, good feedback will be like, oh, I like this character. They'll let you know what's working and what's not working, or if something's confusing, they'll point it out to you, which I sometimes forget that because, I'm the one writing it. So I know what's going to happen. So I forget to write it down because I know what's going to happen. And right. So I, make those, put that foreshadowing in there. And so it's kind of confusing to the reader when it happened.
Right.
Point those things out. They point out what, like if you're describing something, they kind of point out, hey, maybe you should describe this a different way because you're kind of going long-winded here, or and I know there's a lot of writers have a favorite word or a favorite punctuation mark that they tend to use quite often.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely good to know. Yeah, what's yours?
Mine is the M dash. A lot of people don't know what the M dash is, but it's that really long dash that looks like 3 hyphens put together. I use it a lot. And I don't notice I'm using it because it's my favorite punctuation mark.
It's a habit, right? It's your favorite thing. So they catch that when they're peer reviewing it then. And then along the same lines, now as a author, how do you know you have a great editor, right? Especially for somebody who's first time publishing. How do you do a comparison when it comes to that?
Well, 2 things. An editor is first a listener and second a communicator. So when you have an editor, a good editor will always listen to your concerns and what you want to do with your work because it is first and foremost and finally your work. Your editor should never try to change any monumental things or transform the work to sound like them or to sound like anyone else. At the end of the day, your work should still be your work, and a good editor will never overrun your voice or your writing style, even if it doesn't fit within the rules of editing. And what I mean by that is, let's say you don't punctuate correctly, but it works for your world, or you use something that technically doesn't fit or is what we would think to be incorrect, but it works for the story you're telling. We will keep that in there because it's your voice and your style. Additionally, a good editor will always treat you like a person. They should never treat you like a number. And if you ever feel like you're just another number or another client, I suggest finding another editor because editors are there to help you. We're kind of like an assistant to get you through to the final stage of your book. So if you feel like your editor kind of sees you as a hassle, I suggest looking for another editor. And lastly, an editor needs to be a good communicator. So you should be hearing from your editor every couple days, every couple weeks, depending on the project. They should be sending you queries, notes, emails saying, hey, this is what I'm working on. You might need to work on this. Did you mean to do this? It needs to be a back and forth relationship. If you send something into your editor and you don't hear it back for a month, that's a problem.
Makes sense. And as far as editor, when you need one, is it while they're doing the work or after we've already completed a book?
So there are different types of editing. A lot of people don't realize that, but it can be both actually, because there's 4 different styles of editing. And developmental editors will be the ones who help you before you even have the book. You come to them with an idea and they'll help you, flesh out the ideas and get it set so that you have, hey, maybe we can put this in this chapter and this in this chapter. And they kind of help you develop your idea into a book. But copy editors, we are the ones who help you after the book is finished, or let's say you have 80% of the book done, we will help you get, through and work on those things that need to be touched on throughout the rest of the process.
Makes sense. So there's different types. So you basically have to decide, all right, at what point, what type of editor do you need? Is it during or is it after completion? And we need to understand that as authors. Okay. How important is it to have agents when publishing your written work?
Well, if you're going to be going the traditional publishing route, agents are extremely important. Most publishers do not accept unsolicited works, meaning that those works that are not submitted by an agent. Additionally, those publishers that do accept, unsolicited submissions often end up with a large slush pile. And for those who don't know, a slush pile is a large collection of work that has to be sifted through, usually by unpaid interns. I was one of them. And these unpaid interns are the ones who decide if your work is ever seen by an editor or even an editorial assistant. And so that means if an intern doesn't like it, your work will never be published, which is kind of rough.
Wow.
Because if you think about it, what if they don't like the genre or style you write in? What if this prefers, science fiction and you write historical paranormal romance or something like that? They obviously won't resonate with your book. And so your book might never see the light of day unless you use simultaneous submissions if you go that route with traditional publishing and don't have an agent. Interesting.
Yeah, so that feels like luck of the draw there if you go on that route. That's really not really nice. Oh, wow. That's too random for me.
But it's a lot easier to get an agent than a lot of people think. So if you want to go traditional publishing, there are many ways to find an agent.
Okay. That's good to know. I didn't know it was that bad. I know we talked about it, but that's just, wow, that's rough. From your experience, what are successful ways that authors market or share their work with the world?
So especially today, social media is super big. And you can use not just your social media accounts, but you can even pay other social media accounts to give your book a shout out, or to, have somebody be like, hey, check out this person's, Facebook or this person's Instagram or Twitter, things like that, which is nice because there are tons of bookstagrammers out there, bookish YouTubers, and for just a copy of your book, sometimes they'll be willing to help you out and support your book and spread the word. Additionally, using websites and blogs are wonderful ways to, get the word out about your book, because book bloggers are awesome. I say that because I am one. If you have a what were you saying?
No, that's awesome. Bloggers are definitely movers and shakers. That's for sure.
Yeah. So if you have a website, feel free to post about it. And if you reach out to different book bloggers, typically speaking, as if you give a blogger a copy of your book and just let them know that they can have it done according to their schedule, they'll be fine to review your book for you. Reviewers will often review, I say maybe 9 times out of 10, they will review your book for free in exchange of a physical copy of the book, and sometimes even a digital copy.
Mm-hmm.
Those reviewers as a professional reviewer, we review books on various sites, from Amazon to Goodreads to more professional sites like NetGalley and Edelweiss. There's tons of sites out there that if you go through a reviewer, they will publish a review. And so one book reviewer might end up posting a review about your book on 6 or 7 websites, which is great.
That's awesome. Very cool. So as far as more writers, more of them are self-publishing. Do you recommend doing so? And are you seeing a trend towards more self-published books versus more established publishing type media?
Personally, I believe that different people tend to be drawn to the different forms of publishing. Myself, I prefer traditional publishing. And while traditional publishers tend to have a further reach and make more profit in the long run, those who wish to have their name out there, or who want more control over the process, or who are writing a book that's more timely, that they want to get published right away because it might not be as relevant in a couple years, should stick with using a self-publishing entity or a small or independent publisher, because they have more of a chance of getting the book out there faster than going through the traditional route.
Understandable. Yeah, so it really is the urgency that you're trying to select, right? Mm-hmm. And then how long, how much of an effort, investment in putting in and making sure it's published. Especially when you said there's no agent, is even worse for publishers that require it passing through different handoffs, basically. Mm-hmm. Are there any questions I haven't asked you regarding self-publishing or how to publish their books?
I think one thing to note is that information, as I said, has always been key in the publishing industry. And as especially newer authors, this is something I tell them a lot. And even for the women who are a part of the Women of Color Writing Circle, mm-hmm. Something I need to, I just feel like it should be said. You do not have to be published before you can call yourself a writer or an author. That's a misconception. It's not true. If you've put the time in, and if you've given a part of yourself to a project, if you've worked hours or, working out details or thinking of new ways to do something in this project, then you are a writer, you're an author, an artist, whatever you prefer to call yourself. You don't have to wait until you're published and making millions of dollars on a book before you can call yourself an author. That is who you are the minute you put pen to paper.
That's a great message right there. I know I've been writing journal short stories, but I never really thought about it until later. But just like you, I definitely can be in a room and just read for a while if I had a choice. I can seclude myself, but that important point about networking is key, regardless of the type of job or career you have. So I definitely agree with you on that 100%. We have to be comfortable to get uncomfortable, getting out of our comfort zones, basically. So yeah, that's all I have as far as questions are concerned. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share it. I hope that the listeners find this insight, invaluable, because it is, especially for many more people that are writing. I know quite a few friends that are self-publishing right now and really want to support it. If you do have friends, my point for this piece, the last piece, is that if you know people that are writing, support them, right? Mm-hmm. Purchase the book. It's a lot of time and effort to do that. It takes bravery and boldness to be able to publish and basically share their vulnerability, right? Because it's not easy to write and then take the criticism. So I think that's the other advice I would give for anybody writing, is that it's not always about you specifically, right? We learn it takes time to write, but know that it takes a lot of constructive criticism for us to improve each time that we write. And we shouldn't take it too personally if you do get a lot of feedback, regardless of who it is, right? it's part of your world. It's amazing to be able to write. It's a creative world. It's like inventing something new out of your head. It's amazing that we can even put that on paper, and not too many people know how to communicate that and put it down on paper or digital copies nowadays. It's really an art for sure. I believe in that wholly, and we have a lot of awesome stories to share with the world. So I hope more people decide to write more, whether it's through writing, media, blog, journaling, even journals for that matter, articles, right? I know I see people more that are writing in LinkedIn articles, Medium, different, more commonly known media to get yourself established. It's fun, right? So thank you again. Appreciate it. This is Mabel and Pletchich as your host. I'm really grateful that Chyina just joined me, and hopefully we have more to talk about, and check out where she is. She's definitely an awesome editor and teacher when it comes to this type of topic. So don't be shy to reach out to Chyina. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.